because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are. And we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
Welcome to Cows in the Field. This is a podcast where we explore philosophical themes in popular films. My name is Justin.
And I'm Laura.
Today we're heading to Forks, where the sun rarely shines and a strange family of very cold, pale students eat lunch together every day, waiting for a special weirdo to come into their lives and complete their family. We're talking about Catherine Hardwicke's 2008 film, Twilight. Now, Twilight is a strange and wonderful phenomena. It's a movie that grossed $400 million worldwide and yet sports a very weak 5.2 IMDb score. So we decided to bring in an expert on so-called good bad movies, the author of Why It's Okay to Love Bad Movies, professor of philosophy at the University of Montana, Matt Strohl.
Hello, happy to be here.
Thanks for joining us, Matt. So we want to start off with the book, which is making its rounds around philosophers of art. I'm seeing lots of people talking about it on social media, and we have a copy here, and we very much enjoyed reading it. And so, tell us, at the heart of this book is the notion of a good bad movie, and tell us a little bit about what you think about a so bad it's good type movie.
Sure, right. So the title of the book is Why It's Okay to Love Bad Movies. But of course, when people love bad movies, right? They use that word love. They don't, in a sense, think that they're bad. In one sense, they do. In one sense, they don't, right? So they have this phrase, it's so bad, it's good. And the thing is that that's a very curious and puzzling phrase, right? It generates sort of immediate puzzle. How can something be so bad that it's good? That's not really how it works, right? Like,
I'm thinking about food.
This sandwich is so terrible that I like it, right? And yet with movies in particular, and with some other art forms as well, but especially with movies, it's extremely common and well established, and there are whole communities built around it, right? So as a philosopher, right, this is a very inviting situation where there's this sort of obviously puzzling phenomenon that seems unanalyzed, right? Now, so question is, what does it mean to say a movie's so bad it's good, right? Hypothesis. Someone means something different by bad than they mean by good. They're using the terms in different senses, right, within that phrase. So the question is, what's the difference? Like when someone says it's so bad it's good, what do they mean by bad and what do they mean by good? And so what I suggest is that when we say a movie is bad, it's so bad it's good, what we mean is it breaks the rules. It doesn't move like movies are supposed to. It doesn't look like movies are supposed to. It's not constructed the way movies are supposed to. Something about it's not the way it's supposed to be, right? And it's jarring to us, or it's somehow, we can recognize it as bad in that sense that this isn't what a movie's supposed to be like, but that is somehow interesting to us, right? That's amusing or exciting, or it's funny, or it's profound even, right? That like somehow or other that a film gains aesthetic interest by breaking the rules. Mm-hmm. Immediate response. But don't a lot of movies break the rules for these, like, for high artistic purposes, right? So like, something like, the new, whatever the new film festival favorite is, might be breaking a lot of the rules too, like, and the avant-garde breaks the rules by definition. Mm-hmm. So what's the difference between a bad movie and the avant-garde? And my answer to that is the perception of artistic seriousness, right? Mm-hmm. So something like Sharknado or Freddy Got Fingered or The Room breaks the rules in a way that's not seen as artistically serious or artistically important. Whereas, something like, Last Year at Marienbad or, some avant-garde film breaks the rules in a way that is seen as having some high artistic purpose. And the theory of aesthetic value that I is kind of in the background of the whole book and that I then present at the end is the idea that what's valuable about art is its capacity to enable certain activities of engaging with it, right? So like what's valuable about a painting is that it enables us to engage with it in ways that are valuable. And this leaves the door open both for the sort of ordinary types of engagement, the prescribed forms of engagement, like that we're all familiar with, like, oh, here's the Academy Award winning movie and you know how to watch it, you know how to think about it, you know how to respond to it. but it also opens the door for more creative and unusual forms of engagement with art, right? Part of what's exciting about bad movies is that we're in no man's land. We're in the wilderness when we're engaging with these movies. There's no script. Like when I watch Nomadland, I know how to watch it. When I watch some weird out there 70s homemade movie I found on Tubi, and it's like, I don't know how to watch that. I have to find my own way through it.
Interesting. Yeah. You might think that genres prescribe ends or norms for art or literature, or in this case, movies to adhere to. So like what makes a romantic comedy good is that it fulfills the norms of the romantic comedy genre. And what makes the kung fu film good is that it fulfills the norms of the kung fu film. And these are just very different things. And could it be that some of what's going on with bad movie love is a kind of conflict that we face when we're sort of thinking, well, okay, there are these certain types of genres that are held up as high art, and then there are other genres which are like low or something. And the good bad movie is one which is exemplary via the genre standards of some low genre, but not fulfilling the genre standards of some high genre. And the thing you're experiencing is sort of the experience of watching something either for which genre you don't know what it is. You're like, I don't know what genre I'm watching. Like I don't know quite how to evaluate it or how to respond. Or you're watching something where it's the first time or an early experience with that genre, so you're sort of not aware of the rules. Do you see that as building on what you're saying, or is in conflict with your view?
Well, so one thing I try to do in the book is I try to come up with a sort of unified account that encompasses all of the different types of movies that are lumped under this umbrella. And that's a very heterogeneous class of movies, because it's like, there's sort of cult movies, midnight movies, low budget genre movies, and then like these sort of extreme oddities like The Room or Neil Breen movies, right? Faithful Findings, stuff like that, like super extreme oddities. And then there's like these sort of blockbusters that go bad, like Batman and Robin and Battlefield Earth. Yeah. And so these movies are very different from each other. And so I try to come up with a sort of umbrella. And so when it comes to what you're talking about, I think that I do talk about that in chapter 3 of the book, where I talk about genres, where the entire genre or entire category is in some sense seen as a bad genre or a disreputable genre. So like nunsploitation, although nunsploitation is having an art house moment with the Paul Verhoeven film.
I didn't know there was a genre called nunsploitation. That's incredible.
No, there's a terrific genre called nunsploitation. But like so the thing is with genres like that, I take it that the idea is the genre itself is breaking the rules, right? In a sense, like it's like that's not like so. When you take like a something, I think of like something like the American Pie sequels, like these like just absolutely in the gutter sex comedies, where like it's just what it is and what it's trying to be, right? It's just like a series of cheap jokes of people getting caught masturbating in embarrassing situations, and all we're trying to do is like set up enough context for someone to get caught masturbating. And like a movie like that, it's just what it's trying to do, what it's trying to be is already bad, right? Like that never had a chance.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that like there are other cases like these like Neil Breen movies. So Neil Breen is this guy that like self-produced all these super bizarre movies where it's like he's a secret agent who like knows this something that like everyone like there's the entire world is a conspiracy trying to stop him. It's kind of like megalomaniacal movies that he self-produces and stars in, and they're super out there. But like something like that, I would not think that that's high achieving in any genre, right? It's sort of it's good in a way that I like it. I think it's great, but in a way that bypasses the whole notion of achievement.
Interesting,
right?
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, The Room is another good example where you're like, in what sense is it good? You're like, there's no really genre that it's sort of succeeding within.
Well, one quick thing to add, just really quick, is that it's a familiar idea that things can be exciting in virtue of totally breaking the rules, namely in terms of the avant-garde, right? So like if we thought that Tommy Wiseau was doing this as like an avant-garde gesture, we would see it totally differently. But that's where I see the good bad of this sort of extreme kind, like the Tommy Wiseau, Neil Breen variety, is that it's like the sort of accidental avant-garde. And I think that the way we appreciate it is pretty close to the way we appreciate the avant-garde.
So I want to bring this in a way back to Twilight, but I'm going to do it by way of one more question about the book. So, but let me frame it this way. So we watched Twilight for the first time, I don't know, a few days ago. And then we watched the rest of the movies in the series, and we had no idea what to expect. But having read your book, we were open to all kinds of different experiences. We went in with an open mind. And I suspect that many people seeing Twilight, especially people in the kind of cultural criticism scene, did not go into a movie like Twilight with an open mind. But a big part of your book is arguing that we should go into movies like Twilight and other movies that are conventionally bad with an open mind, with the sort of mind open to potentially being able to love them, to find good in them. Tell us maybe a little bit about why that's a good attitude to cultivate.
Absolutely. So great question. So there's a tendency, I think, especially in the internet age, when communication is so effortless, like we can always be talking to everyone. There's a real tendency for groupthink. And like I've joined Twitter in the last year, and I mean, you can see the way this happens, where narratives get crafted around something really quickly. And then you get tied into these narratives by your social association. So it's like people like us think of this way, and people just sort of, in like the way that Twitter works, the narrative surrounding a film has been like circulated within an hour of the film premiering anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Right. And so I take it that like so often we approach a film with preconceptions, expectations that are shaped in part by our like sort of aspirational social identity, right? Like which people do we want to be like?
Yep.
Right. And we see, so it's like when we see certain people liking something that we don't want to be like those people, we don't want to like it. And when we see the people who we do want to be like something, we do want to be like them. So like in the moment when Twilight, when, you know, most people encountered Twilight, it was like Twilight was for these like screaming throngs of, you know, adolescent girls. And like there was like a strong cultural sense of like, you know, if you're not in that group, you have no excuse. This is not for you.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that like that, and that was just so strong and so prevalent that like the echo of that has still not died down. Right. That's like the lens we see Twilight through, is like, you know, it's for girls. It's for adolescent girls circa the, you know, early 2000s.
And part of the reason we don't want to be associated with them is that I think there's this, and you do touch on this in the book, there's this kind of residual sexism, because it's a little bit like, not only am I not a girl, so it's not for me, but like, I'm not even aspirationally part of this community, right? I don't want to be part of this community because I don't want to be seen as associated with them, because I don't think they have good taste. Because there are other movies where I think we are not part of the community and we recognize it's not for us, but we kind of do want to be part of that. We want to like it, to be in that group.
Yeah. When I actually have watched the first Twilight movie.
I'm sorry.
No. But I watched it 3 times in 2009. And I watched it with 3 very different audiences. I watched it with my little cousin, who was genuinely like excited to watch it.
She was in the demographic.
She was a tween, yeah. And she was like just the right age for Twilight. I watched it in a film class in college. That was more from like it was a class focused on the economic influences on Hollywood films. So this was more about like, this is going to be a new model going forward. This production, you know, was a smaller budget. Summit had like an enormous success. Like, this is a case study for what you're going to see for the next decade. So that was kind of a different kind of academic perspective, where we weren't really engaging in the film itself. And then I watched it like as a drinking game.
I see. Yeah.
And like, it was just funny to like that I had such different audiences that I was watching it with. And like, but I do think like with the drinking game for college, like there was this thing where there was an impulse to ridicule it, and also an impulse that we like wanted to be a part of it and know it and watch it.
Oh,
right? Because we didn't have to watch Twilight and joke about it. It was like I think we wanted to watch it, and we just felt the need to pretend that we were better than that by putting on a drinking game. But it reminded me in the 4th grade when I was like, oh, I don't want to see Spice World, but I totally did want to see Spice World. And then I went to see Spice World, but then told other people that I hated Spice World, but I didn't hate Spice World. I loved it.
Totally. And this is beautiful because we totally use mockery and ridicule as a way to distance ourselves from our pleasures, right? In the sense that it's because in a way that reflects our social aspirations. It's like, I don't want to be, I'm too cool for Twilight. Therefore, I watch it ironically to make fun of it.
Yep.
It's exactly how it works.
So Matt, tell us about your journey with Twilight.
Totally. So, yeah. So it's funny. I actually have this kind of like almost lifelong vampire thing, where when I was like,
tell me more.
My like high school creative writing teacher could embarrass the shit out of me, but with like all these short stories I wrote about vampires.
Hell yeah.
So this was like kind of the metaphor of the vampire has always been really gripping to me, and like so the funny thing was before Twilight came out, like solidly before Twilight came out, right? That was right at the beginning where online dating was getting to be a thing. And I had just recently moved to Missoula. So I had set up like an online dating profile, but like it was very early. So online dating was still kind of sketchy, creepy. So my kind of joke playing that up was my profile name was Not a Vampire. Like, don't worry, I'm not a vampire. And so, but then like Twilight came out, and so everybody thought that my dating profile was a Twilight joke, right? And I became super resentful of this, right? Because people were always like, "Oh, like Twilight." I'm like, vampires were before Twilight.
Yeah.
Right? So I was super resentful of it, and I was like, I like Larry Fessenden's Habit, and Tony Scott's The Hunger, and that's Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, right? So that was where I was at, and like I developed like a real chip on my shoulder about Twilight because it made like something that I found so cool became so uncool because of Twilight, right?
Mm-hmm.
It became like something that was to be made fun of. There was this huge glut of just crap vampire fiction. To be fair, some of it was good. Like I watched the entire Vampire Diaries and it was good. And I read the entire Vampire Academy series and it was good. But like at the same time, I was like constantly a Twilight naysayer. And like, I hadn't even read the books, but I knew they were bad because, some Mormon lady wrote them or whatever. And like, so when I finally saw the movie, it just was to confirm my contempt for Twilight. Like, oh, this is just crap,
Did you see it? You didn't see it in theaters, did you? Or was this? Like
I don't think I saw it in theaters.
Yeah.
I highly doubt I would have done that. I don't specifically remember, but I think that, I rented it or whatever, or watched it on streaming, or I don't remember. It was so long ago. I don't remember how we watched movies exactly at that moment.
Yeah.
But, I think we got discs from Netflix.
Yeah, we were Netflixing at the time.
That was probably where I was at too then, or Redbox or something. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I saw the movie and I did not like it. And I was like very, proud of myself for not liking it. I was, but like, the thing was that I already like, I've been into bad movies forever. That's never been a thing that I wasn't into. And like my brother, eventually my brother watched New Moon. I'm like, why the hell are you watching New Moon? Right. Like one was enough, but he watched New Moon and he called me, and I still remember this very well. He called me and like really lobbied for me to watch New Moon. It's like, I am absolutely certain that you will like this movie. Like you're not going to believe the dialogue. You're not going to believe the acting. You're not going to believe it. Like it's just, you're going to love it. And my brother, I trust implicitly, of course, if he's going to give me this, this speech, then I'm going to watch the movie. And he was completely right. Right. Like I watched it. I'm like, oh my God. Like, it was just, the premise of New Moon, right, in part is that Bella, it's like Edward is afraid that by being around, he's going to put Bella at risk, and so he's gone to like Florida or something. And Bella is left on her own. And she's so heartbroken that what she starts finding is that when she engages in risky behavior, she hallucinates and sees Edward. So the whole setup of the movie is that like her childhood friend is this like now this like buff Native American guy. The whole setup of the movie is that she wants him to teach her to fix motorcycles because when she rides a motorcycle, she hallucinates that she sees her ex.
Yeah.
Right. And then like the story is then of him like falling in love with her and then like him totally getting crushed as Edward eventually returns. And like, this is such just a bizarre setup for a movie. It's like a funny setup. And there's like, when they start turning into werewolves, the CGI is so silly and so ridiculous that I had just no trouble enjoying it.
You're locked
just
in.
Having a big laugh. Yeah.
It's also like a Romeo and Juliet. Like they're weaving so many different things into that movie. It's almost it's audacious in a way that is. It's almost like the movie can't even bear how much audacious stuff it's putting on the table. I mean, the end. And then they go to the Volturi at the end.
You love that scene.
I love that sequence actually, where
you love it when Alice steals a yellow Lamborghini and dresses up like Grace Kelly.
Yeah,
she's got a cool scarf on.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely wild. When they're in Italy and they're like that's like the climax of the movie, right? They're in Italy and she's driving as fast as he can because Edward. The whole thing is he's gonna reveal himself on this anti-vampire parade, and they're gonna murder him because they thought vampires had been eradicated.
His head right off.
For me. So this is a little bit like, I think, like The Wire season 2 kind of thing, like, which I love season 2, but it's a little bit like watching New Moon. I was like, the whole movie, I'm like, man, this movie has to be worse than the first one. And then that last, I don't know, 25 minutes, I was
all in.
Totally. Yeah. And like what you're saying though, that so the initial hook for me is this is ridiculous. This is funny. The dialogue is funny. It's like, but like the thing is that then led me to start spending time with it, right? And like, as you alluded to, once you start spending time with these movies, layers just start unpeeling and there's so much going on. And like, I think I've watched the entire series all the way through 7 times, I believe. And like, even on this last one, I took like 20, 30 pages of notes of like new stuff that I was noticing as I watched them. Right?
I couldn't stop thinking about
these
them.
These movies are like actually immensely rich.
Yeah, we're going to get into it. But okay, so when did it, but I'm curious, when was it that in New Moon and you were like, wait a second, I got to go back. And then you went back and watched one and then watched them through, or what happened then?
Right. Well, I think at this point they weren't even all out yet.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Right. Like I don't even, right. But like I went back and watched one and I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. And yeah, absolutely. And then I just sort of like, I think that by the time we got to the 4th one, I was going to see them in the theater.
Yeah.
For sure. At that point. And I was super excited for them as they came out. Yeah.
So, okay, let's bring it back to the good, bad movie thing. So, let's talk a little bit about, and we're also going to talk about the movie itself, but I'm curious just to bridge these two topics. In what sense, and this is a round table, so we're going to go around here and bring out some of this stuff, I think, because it's a personal, reaction. Mm-hmm. But in what sense is Twilight, number one, a bad movie by Matt Strohl's account? And then in what sense, for you guys, I'm curious, is it thereby made to be good? Because I think we all agree that there are elements of the movie that are conventionally bad. And I think we all agree, and we've already played our hand here, that we kind of love Twilight, number one.
Not kind of. I'm not going to qualify
Okay,
it.
Laura's
I'm a
into
Twilight
it.
Tammy.
And we'll get to that character in a second. But yeah, I'm just curious, like, so what ways do we think it is conventionally bad, and what ways is it thereby made to be good? Okay, so I'm going to start with Matt for this question.
Okay, so I think one thing that is immediately very strange about Twilight as you watch it for the first time is that the positionality is entirely female. And that like the character of Bella is not the object, but the subject of the story in a way that's really unusual. And in part because she's left so blank in a way that lets the audience identify with her sort of from a wide range of different forms of experience. And I think that like one of the things that people often complain about with Twilight is the character of Bella and like her blankness and her uninterestingness. Right. But I think that what they're responding to is the idea that she's supposed to be this sort of object. The camera's supposed to be gazing at her, ogling her. She's supposed to be this sort of interesting subject of the story in this way. But in fact, she's not. She's the point of identification for the audience in a way that it's usually like the dopey male character. So that's, I think, one thing to bring up is that like the Twilight is unconventional in the way that it has this sort of surprising female positionality that we normally would associate with like a film that was more explicitly politically progressive. Whereas in Twilight is regressive in all sorts of ways at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's super interesting to me because it feels sort of radical to me because it's giving the female point of view, but not the one that would be associated with the kind of person who wants to see the female point. Right? In other words, the sort of agenda that wants to see the female point of view represented. That's the point of view they want to see, right? And that's what's part of what's so interesting to me about it.
That's interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's really interesting. I had a simpler answer to the question of why it's conventionally bad, which is there's a scene in this movie where Edward and Bella are in the forest.
Yeah, that's the one, right?
And
hold on, Spider Monkey.
Yeah. Pretty much every scene where they're in a forest is questionable in many ways. But the one I had in mind is the scene when she's walking through the forest and he's kind of like creepily walking behind her, and he is saying like, you know, he's like basically say it, I'm a vampire, right?
Say it out loud.
Say it out loud, like I've killed all these people, and she's like, I'm not afraid. And then she's like, I have to show you what I look like in the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens oh my God, we got to spend 20 minutes on this. But what happens next is he picks her up and runs like through, like his feet are like the Wile E. Coyote, like moving. It's like faster than and his body is completely still, and he's just moving through the underbrush and all the way up to the top of the mountain, where then he can reveal.
Got to get out of the cloud cover.
So then he reveals that he shines in the sunlight, and then her line is,
"It's like diamonds." Beautiful.
It's so sincere. It's almost like painful to hear that line and wonder what it must have been like for Kristen Stewart to have to say that line. So that's my example of a thing that is conventionally very bad, because it's supposed to be in a way like it's not their meet cute, but it's their moment when they like are first sort of sharing love together. And it's so unusual. And it's like not sexy or romantic. I mean, it's kind of romantic, but it's romantic, but like in such an earnest way that you're cringing at the same time. I don't know. What's your
Totally. And it's like naive. It's like it's presented in this naive way, not as a joke. And it's like this is coming from Stephanie Meyer's imagination, is like, and the fact that this is supposed to be romantic in the movie and it's presented as romantic, and it's not, the movie doesn't wink that this is silly and not romantic. Mm-hmm. Like so the fact, and that's exactly the kind of thing, because if it starts to wink, then it's no longer conventionally bad. It's just a joke, right? So it's conventionally bad. It reads as conventionally bad because it's just so freaking ridiculous, but it's not meant to be ridiculous. It's supposed to play straight, but it doesn't. Totally.
What did you have any other examples for?
Yeah, no, I was thinking that the sincerity of the movies and the complete seriousness with which they take this love story, and like the sort of unblinkingness of the fact that Jacob in the third movie like is literally never wearing a shirt. I mean, I guess they make a joke about it one or two times.
It's the second movie, I think, where it's
the third movie.
It's the third movie?
Because that's when he becomes a werewolf. He stops wearing his shirt.
You can't have it on,
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, it's just really so hot. I think too, this is particularly true of the first movie, I mean, but there's so many like very bold style choices.
Yeah.
That don't necessarily cohere in a way you might think. It's like that scene with Edward. I mean, not only is the dialogue, pretty extreme, and that's also the same scene where he says, "You're on my own personal brand of heroin." It's also, but the camera is also like flying around them like Michael Bay style, then sort of like creeping through the woods like maybe it's like an animal vision. The whole thing is color graded so extremely. The whole movie's green. There's some very intense needle drops that are like maybe perhaps like
calm as you see him, Bella.
Okay. Indie cool, but the movie's not really that cool because it's so sincere, and all these things don't quite fit together in a way that feels smooth in the way that we're used to in these kinds of movies, and that sort of jarringness I think is, and it sometimes like it takes you out of the scene and every now and again, and yet I'm totally drawn back in because I feel like Kristen Stewart and Rob Pattinson have great chemistry, and I'm actually really invested in these characters after 4 movies, like really 5 movies, really invested in these characters. But yeah, I think that's my feeling for why it's conventionally bad.
Okay, so let me ask you this, Laura.
Yes.
So you just experienced these movies, and for the first time you're watching it. I mean, you're watching it really anew for the first time, and you're watching all this wild stuff. Now, I mean, we were going into it with Matt's book in our mind,
Mm-hmm.
and so we were open-minded and sort of prepared to engage and not be dismissive. I mean, do you remember at what point in the movie when you were like locking in, and the movie was like working for you despite or perhaps because of these strange stylistic convention breaking choices?
I'm trying to think if I can remember the exact moments.
Because I mean, I just go back to the forest scene, because the forest scene I think is so important. There's just these moments where I'm feeling a tension. I think this is what it came for me, is I'm feeling pulled at once to sort of find this very deeply uncomfortable. And yet at the same time, you have two very attractive people on screen buying in completely to what they're doing. As far as I can tell. I mean, I know Pattinson later has made fun of it or whatever, but in the moment, he's completely bought in, and they're creating a kind of chemistry and romance in a way that I have never really seen. There's such tension in everything that happens, and it's like it escalates the drama and the attraction between them, and that makes me interested. I'm like interested in that, and I want to watch it in a way that I like don't necessarily want to watch two attractive people making out. Like that's not, that's, which is often what you get in like these rom-coms or whatever. Is
well,
just
the
like,
sort of like when they finally get together, that resolves it. And in this case, like it's not at all the resolution.
Yeah, it's like it keeps you constantly, it's like drawing out the tension like to a breaking point almost.
Yeah, I think the baseball scene might have been where I sort of like was like, this is so fun. Yes, it's silly. It's so fun though. What a fun sequence. The baseball scene is really great. And we were watching the behind the scenes of how they did all the practical effects for that scene. And there's a lot that goes into it that I wasn't even appreciating because it's pretty seamless, honestly. There's not any funky CGI in that to take you out of it. And it's just like the muse is hitting hard and it's fun. I was just like, I'm into it.
So that's actually a perfect example in the sense that I can speak to the way that I experienced that originally and then the way I experienced it years later, right? Which was that like at the time that was like Harry Potter's zeitgeist, right?
Yeah.
And so when I watch it, I'm like, this is the Quidditch scene, right? Yeah. This is the freaking Quidditch scene. And like I had so much contempt for that because it's so like the movie tries to establish this sort of Pacific Northwest mood, but it actually I think succeeds at that very well. It really captures this vibe of the Pacific Northwest. And like, it's sort of so far from the Harry Potter vibe. And like, when you suddenly get this Quidditch scene, it's sort of like, to me, it's like, it's pandering to what the young adult audience wants in a way that is totally disregarding the mood and tone of the film. It's bad. Right. But then when I went back and watched it, having now seen the werewolves from the next movie, when I went back to watch this one, I'm like, this is some gonzo shit. Like this is from another dimension right here. Like what was I, like I what I saw was how small my own imagination had been. To look at that scene, that spectacular scene, and to have contempt for it, I like, what kind of small-minded person am I? That was my reaction.
That's
right?
Such humility, Matt. I think that's one of the great things that comes out of your book is this sort of open-mindedness and willingness to reevaluate. And I think that you exhibit it as much as you make the case for it, which I think is great. Can I say one thing about that scene? So that scene has one of the coolest effects, and it's a really subtle effect. And we watched the behind the scenes because I wanted to see if they talked about this effect. But when the three enemy vampires show up, like I don't even remember their names.
James, Victoria, and
Lamont or something.
What's the French one's name?
Laurent.
Yeah. Laurent. Thank you.
So when they show up, they're walking like across like this. They kind of come out of the smoke and they're walking like across and they're kind of, embedded in smoke, and there's a canted angle and it's in sort of slow motion. They're walking in a way that it looks like they're floating. It looks kind of like they're walking on air as they're coming in. And I was like, oh, it looks like they're on one of those moving walkways at an airport. That's what it looks like, because they're moving faster than they're walking, And so we watched the behind the scenes, and in the behind the scenes, they took this very seriously. We want to create this effect, which has this interesting effect on the audience. It'll make it feel like it's subtle, but I think it'll make you feel like they're immortal or special in some way. And what they did was they took a piece, like a plastic sheet, and it was on a kind of pulley, and it pulled them. So they were like they were walking on a moving, thing. And then they were just walking on a plastic sheet that was moving and pulling them at the same time. And it turned out it was actually kind of hard to do because they had to balance on it and so on. But they did this, and I was just sitting there like, yeah, that's an amazing practical effect. Like that kind of thing, I think like it shows there's like a real craft to this film that I think gets lost behind all the strange pageantry of the, convention breaking stuff, where that's an amazing effect. And I've never seen that kind of effect in I've seen a lot of fantasy movies and I've never seen that. And it's subtle and it's effective.
Totally. It's wild looking. It really grabs you. Absolutely.
So, okay. But Matt, you took notes on this movie. Tell us more about what other notes you took on Twilight.
Well, Twilight. Well, so, I mean, if you want me to actually look.
Yeah, let's see.
Do it.
Let me see.
As you're looking through your notes, hold on. I want to say I'll say one other thing. So another aspect of this movie that I think is just gonna offend people who are, who have a steady diet of Oscar films is the Bella voiceover, like throughout the series, where basically something happens on screen, like Edward in this case says, or she's like, Edward's a vampire. You're a vampire. And he's like, yep. And then he's like,
he like makes a face and she's like, that was really rude. He thinks I smell bad.
Yeah.
It's like basically
and,
like, it's like a voiceover.
But then like after that whole sequence where she like confirms, yep, vampire, he says, I want to eat you. And then clearly she's in love with him. Like then there's a voiceover in the next part where she's like, just like sitting in her, bed or whatever. And she says,
First, Edward was a vampire. Second, there was a part of him, and I didn't know how dominant that part might be, that thirsted for my blood. And third, I was unconditionally and irrevocably in love with him.
And I was like, yeah, we got that. You didn't have to tell us. Anyway, I love it. That's a convention breaker right there.
I mean, it's a movie convention breaker. It's not a teenage diary convention breaker.
No, totally. But I mean, it's one of these things when you adapt it, you don't necessarily need to include in 2, it's Dear Alice, right?
So many Alice emails in 2.
Totally.
Oh yeah. And also 2 is the Romeo and Juliet. I mean, I think they all start off
reading
with
Romeo and Juliet in the class, and then they have the like Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, but I think the
out.
Opening line of 2 is these violent desires have violent ends. She opens it with Romeo and Juliet, just setting the scene for like, we're going to take this shit so seriously.
Twilight. So interestingly, like Stephanie Meyer had literary references in mind for each of these movies, right?
Okay.
So Twilight is supposed to be, the literary reference is Pride and Prejudice. And then obviously Romeo and Juliet, although many commentators have thought Jane Eyre is more appropriate, and I tend to agree. We'll come back. Second one though.
Okay.
So obviously New Moon is Romeo and Juliet. Eclipse is Wuthering Heights. And then Breaking Dawn is the combination of Midsummer Night's Dream and Merchant of Venice.
Okay.
So we'll need to reconstruct all these. I did do the legwork of reading through Twilight forms for all the legwork that Twilight fans have done and tracing all the references.
Wow.
but like the first Twilight movie, the setup is so interesting to me because so Forks is I've been to Forks. Okay.
Oh, it's a real place.
I went to Forks. It's a real place. I've been there. And it's on the Olympic Peninsula. And the reason that I went there was I was doing a hike in the Olympic National Park. I hiked the entire coastal stretch of the park. And so you have to do this big shuttle from one end to the other, have someone drop you off and then hike back to where you left your car. And like Forks was like the halfway point of the shuttle. So we like stopped in Forks at a grocery store, and I'm like, "Wait, this is Forks, like from Twilight?" And and I'm like asking everybody about it, and they were like, "The Twilight tourism around here calmed down a few years ago." But like I was really soaking in the vibe, and I have to say, like, the movie doesn't. It's not filmed it's filmed in different areas around Seattle and the area, but the movie does a tremendous job, I think, with creating a vibe, and the vibe of this place. And Forks is a weird place because although it's in range of Seattle, it's super remote. Like the way you get to Seattle is you take a ferry, right? You take a ferry and so it's like this weird sense of being very cut off. It takes hours to get anywhere because it's all Indian reservation and mountains and national park, and it's very circuitous. So I feel like Twilight creates this incredible sense of place and of this woman who's not from here. Like there's a sort of stranger entering this place, and then like sort of her experiences as the new kid in town in this incredibly weird place. And I think that it does a really, actually, in conventional terms, extremely good job with this kind of impressionistic, like there's a lot of handheld photography. We get a strong sense of how she experiences the place. So I think that another thing is though that like I'm drawn in by all this, but then we get vampire baseball, then we get hang on spider monkey zooming around, and so like part of what makes the movie read unconventional and makes it read good bad is the way that it's so jagged in tone, right? That it moves between this like really like earnest coming of age material or like stranger in a strange place material, and then we got hang on spider monkey zoom up the mountain in the next scene.
Part of what I was wondering, actually, watching the movie was like, is this actually a bad movie? Because for some of the reasons you mentioned, Matt, I mean, I think it is actually quite successful. Also as a high school movie, I mean, also as the fish out of water coming into the new environment. And I don't know, the feeling of when you meet someone for the first time and you're drawn to them and it's so awkward and uncomfortable. And I love that it stayed in those moments of uncomfortableness, which is not something most movies do. And I think to its credit in that regard.
So you're wondering if it's just a good movie?
Well, I was wondering that. And I mean, for me, the color grading does kind of hurt it. I mean, I know that it's intentional because they're trying to capture the overcast nature of the Pacific Northwest, but I'm looking at your virtual background here, Matt, and it's the red room from Twin Peaks, and I feel like Twin Peaks captured that, and it didn't need that blue color grading to do it. Just if it's overcast, just a wetness that's just you get it on the film. But so I'm not a big fan of the color grading, so maybe that's one aspect of it that I struggle with.
Yeah, I mean, I would make a case for it just in the sense that it's a very grimy place, actually, Forks is, and I feel like the color grading helps to convey that. So it's ugly in a way. Like I can agree with that much, but that like in a sense it does convey this sort of ugly, grimy like Forks. It's a tiny little high school they go to. Like all the kids the same age sit at the same table. Right. And if anything, the movie undersells how poor this area is, I would say. So I find that there's like a sense of grittiness that you get from that visual look that is like appropriate to the setting. And I almost feel like it errs too far on the side of like, this is too like middle class feeling. I don't know.
Yeah. The locations that they choose they feel real. Like the diner, Bella's dad's house. It feels like a lived-in place, and actually that's interesting because it makes the Cullens house feel so alien in a way because it's this weird modernist house in the middle of an otherwise seemingly blue collar town, like logging town, and it's kind of like secluded away, and it's so fancy, and that's great because they're so strange and otherworldly. So
yeah, I think there's something kind of magical about that area of the U.S. for so many of us. The Twin Peaks too. I think half of the appeal of Twin Peaks is its location and the made up town of Twin Peaks. I don't know if it's just like something about giant trees. The same thing with like Northern California too. The redwoods, right? Like those just. It makes you feel like there's like something supernatural about it.
That's interesting. Yeah.
But yeah, one of the things that I wanted to mention, just a shout out that I think is just good, and I love it, and is the relationship between Bella and her dad. There is a sort of repeating thing where Bella just like ups and leaves him and just like goes to Italy, goes to Arizona. She does it. She pulls this shit a lot on her dad, and I feel bad about it. But their relationship developing is so lovely. And I feel very, very invested in that. I think it's done with like a lot of care. And I think the arc of relationship, and then then by the time you get to the fourth and fifth movie, when she's making a decision to leave her family, you feel the weight of that. Like her decision to just like disappear when she's a vampire and not have her dad be a part of her life anymore, which then she goes back on because it's just too hard.
Well,
Jacob kind of does it for her, but you feel the weight of that because you've watched them get close in the past couple, in the past year and a half or so. I think these movies don't cover a lot of ground time-wise, actually. I don't know. The third movie might not be my favorite, but just the moment when they're like trying to talk about have the talk and whether or not she's a virgin is just incredible.
Yeah. So I was really interested in that you were saying, though, I think it's maybe just good, right? And how do I make that determination? Because so the title of the book is Why It's Okay to Love Bad Movies. And I do try to make this distinction between what it means to love bad movies and to merely like enjoy making fun of them. And I'd argue that loving bad movies is in a sense better, higher activity that we ought to prefer. And like, I do think that when you love bad movies, where you end up with is exactly the way where you ended up, which is like, I don't even want to say this is bad, actually, right? Because the point is that the sense in which it's bad is a sort of recognition of its status as bad, not a judgment, right? So it's like when I say Twilight is so bad it's good, I'm like, I get what you mean by bad, and I agree that Twilight is bad in the sense that you mean. However, I do not agree that it's bad simpliciter. I think it's actually great, even though all the ways that you think it's bad, I agree with all those descriptions, right? But I actually think it's good, right? So I think almost always, like, you end eventually, and I think that like starting out from a position of I'm open to it even though it's bad will then lead us to be open to something in a way that'll let us see what's actually good about it, right? And that's the way that it often goes, with that just sort of not even wanting to use the word bad anymore.
Spoken like a true pluralist, Matt. Many ways to value, many ways, but you have to cultivate the open mind. That's the key. Yeah. That's the real key. Go into it with an open mind. I want to mention, one other, or a couple of the things that I really, really enjoyed about why I think it's actually quite good. And so I think the movie actually bears out repeat viewings. And that's, I think, a really, really good sign for a movie. We went back and rewatched some of the scenes yesterday just to get ready for this, and I just found myself just playing out the whole scene. Like, I wasn't expecting to do that, and we stayed with the movie much longer than I expected. And because I was just enjoying it. I was just plain enjoying those scenes. And part of the reason is that the first time you watch it, there's some scenes that feel, you said the word earlier, jagged, but they feel they're shaggy and weird and uncomfortable. But the second time you watch it, you understand why. It's actually purposefully done.
You have more information.
You understand that, like, the reason Edward is attracted to Bella in a particular way and why he's so uncomfortable around her is that he can't read her mind, whereas he can read everyone else's mind. He has this strange, urge to eat her as well. Like, he's like, part of the sexual attraction comes with like a desire to like drink her blood. But I actually think it's even deeper than this. I mean, Edward is a vampire that has a lot of self-loathing for the fact that he's a vampire. He sort of hates himself for being a vampire, and he despises that aspect of him, that he doesn't want to be a vampire. He thinks he's somehow evil by his nature and so on, no matter how much he fights against it. And because he can't read Bella's mind, he's forced to interact with Bella like he would have had to interact with her when he was a human. So he's forced to interact with her just like another human. And that reminds him of his humanity. So she like is this person who's constantly reminding him that he was once a human and, forcing him to sort of be a human again. And I think that's a big reason why he's so attracted and so interested in her. And I only got that on the second view. You could not get that on the first view. It's something that's not possible to capture because you don't have enough information. And I think that's actually quite interesting and deep, because I never would have thought that you could have a love story built around, like, this is the person which makes me not hate myself anymore. Like, that's, I think, a really cool idea.
Absolutely. And there's a paradox, right? Which is also that, like, the way he experiences her smell, he later describes it as a white hot branding iron in his throat, right? So her smell is so appealing to her. So that first scene where they meet, where she's like, does my hair smell? Right. Yeah. Like, where he's just, and the thing is that the problem is her smell. She's right about that. It is her smell. Yep. But the issue is that her smell makes him want to drain her blood so badly that it feels like a white hot branding iron in his throat. But I think what you said is also absolutely true. So there's this paradox that's happening where at once he feels more human than ever, but also more of a monster than ever at the same time. Yep. Right. So it like enhances his self-loathing. And so there's this wonderful moment where he says to her, like, he says, no, seriously, like, at all times I want to murder you, right? Like, she goes, right, and her response is, I trust you.
Yeah.
Right? But I'm serious. Like, right now, I want nothing more than to drink your blood.
But I think that's so cool, right? That's like the thing. We've talked about that on this very idea on this podcast of like, the person you love the most is the person who will love you because of your flaws, right? Like it's not that they're like, oh, I can deal with this, but it's like, no. I trust you because somehow you've exuded humanity or faith or whatever in a way that like, maybe it's even irrational for me to do this, but I'm going to do this. It's like, I'm going to take this leap of faith with you. And like, that puts such a responsibility on Edward, but he's also like, she reveals like, her magnanimity, like I don't know, brings out the best in him, makes him want to be better. So it's like he's trying to get her to move away, but everything that he says to get her to move away, and she doesn't, reinforces his love for her.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's especially intriguing to think that Stephanie Meyer conceptualizes this as being like Pride and Prejudice, where he's like Mr. Darcy, where like her opinion of him so it's like her version of Mr. Darcy, who is like, well, the actual character is like too preoccupied with practical matters, and stuff like that. So her version of that is Edward. And like, just thinking about that kind of is very, very amusing. It's not amusing in a condescending sense, but I'm really, when I watch it and I think of it in that way, that like, this is supposed to be Mr. Darcy, it adds an extra level, I think, of appeal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did not pick up on that at all.
I mean, it seems like you got to be on the Twilight message boards to know all the references in these.
Well, there are actually within the books, there are references to each literary, each of the literary references within it somewhere to guide you there. But I think that only occasionally do those show up in the movies.
Yeah,
I think like you might see her reading Pride and Prejudice at one point. Like often, like in for example, in Breaking Dawn, someone's reading Merchant of Venice. Like that comes up, right? So there are places
Alice's
where
note.
It's the note. Yeah, it's the note.
Yeah, the note is on the copy of Merchant of Venice, right? Exactly. They're like destroy this. Exactly.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Let me throw out another theme that I thought was really interesting. This is a theme that kind of gets developed more and more as the films go on, but it's present in the first film, which is this idea that you might be a lost soul, and as you talked about earlier, Matt, like Bella is kind of a cipher. She's a blank slate for the audience to identify with. And one thing that I think a lot of young women, and I mean certainly young men as well, might identify with is this feeling of being just sort of like alienated from everything. Like you're just kind of like a loner. You don't fit in anywhere, and that is borne out in the movie. I mean, she quickly makes friends with these girls and boys at the school, but she never really fits in with them, and that is borne out by the rest of the movies, where like they kind of go off and they're sort of written. I mean, they're there, but they're written out, more and more. So she's this kind of person who doesn't, she's in between two families, right? Her dad there, and he's kind of an absent father, and whatever. Her mom's in Florida or Arizona or wherever she's in Florida, right?
At that point, yeah.
Yeah, I can't. Sorry, I always remember she's moving around. But anyway, so she's kind of lost, and she finds and gets to choose a new family. So this idea that like you can actually in your life at some point in your life choose your family and sort of gain a new adopted family, and we do this all the time with our friend groups and. You can do it. That's something that you talk about. You could do it with Bad Movie Love, right? You find these sub communities and kind of create a kind of family within them where you share, things that you might not even be able to share with other people. You share different experiences. But what Bella gets to share is with the Cullens, she's sort of welcomed with open arms. And I remember when I was watching it for the first time, I was thinking, how's this going to go? Like, this could be weird. Like, I have no idea how they're going to react to her. Is this going to be something they are totally against? How is this going to work? And, besides a few comments about, well, maybe this isn't, what if this goes bad? Maybe we'll eat you or whatever. And that's Rosalie, I guess.
It's just Rosalie.
Yeah, she's the only one.
Yeah.
But the rest of them are just like unbelievably welcoming of her. Like it's almost like a fantasy how good they are to Bella from the beginning to the point where like they're willing to, put themselves in danger to protect her. And I was really taken by that. I felt like that's an element of earnestness in the film that is warm and inviting and makes me want to come back and live in it more and more, because I you want to have those people in your life who just accept you for who you are, even though you're different from them.
I also kind of like to think about maybe they just were so sick of Edward being a mopey loner. It's like the first time he brought home a girl and they're like, oh, thank God. Like, we've gone to 16 high schools and this is the first girl he's taken home. Like, oh my God. Like, because they're all coupled up. He's the only one in that house who doesn't have hasn't been with his partner for a freaking century or whatever. And I think they're all just like, Edward needs to find a wife. I would say Edward needs to get laid, but that's not what he's interested in. So Edward needs to find a wife, a vampire wife.
Are you too familiar with the movie Ghost World with Steve Buscemi and So just like in that movie where you have this sort of awkward, young adult female who doesn't fit in and is and doesn't really find an affinity with her contemporaries, and she finds this bond with this Steve Buscemi character who is obsessed with old blues, and what we find is her being gripped by the past in a certain way. And I think that part of what's important about the Cullens is that they're from the past, right? This is part of what's appealing to her about this family, is that they represent a different time. And I think that the character of Bella is alienated from the world she finds herself in. This is part of why she's ended up in Forks, I think, right? Kind of the edge of the world. And she just doesn't find a place in the world, but she does find a place when this group of people that are from another time, right? And I think that it sort of stands in for the way that a girl that age in the situation might do a lot of reading, right? Might spend a lot of time with sort of gothic romance, and sort of immerse her imagination in this world. And I think that the Cullens sort of give her a space to where she does fit in, where she does identify, in the sense that it's where her imagination stretches to.
Yeah, and I mean, this also connects up, I think, to the part of we don't want to psychoanalyze too much, but I think part of the hatred of the movie is that Bella is this sort of loner outsider whose arc in the story is basically that she's adopted into this new family. But I think that in doing that, she subverts the standard arc of a kind of female protagonist, which is basically has to either be some sort of sex object who conforms to various patriarchal norms for women, or she has to basically become a surrogate man, right? She has to become an ass kicker who basically adopts the rules governing male dominance. And really, I mean, there's maybe a little bit of that towards the end of this, but it's really not that. And Bella is really, she's just looking for a home in a way, and Edward's looking for someone to remind him what it was like to be human. And I think that's a big part of why Edward doesn't want to turn her, is that by turning her now, she's just a vampire, right? And so she won't be able to remind him of his humanity. But and I think that maybe in some sense we've become so cynical that we can't just watch a classic love story anymore. We have to see something that is, I don't know, snarky or winky or somehow covers up the loviness. I don't watch a lot of romantic comedies, so I don't know what they're like right now. But there
barely are any.
Yeah,
the romantic comedy is a dying genre, and the romantic comedies that are being made are generally they're generally holiday Christmas themed romantic comedies. There's hardly any. And I know this because I watch every single one of them. Not the holiday ones. There are too many. There are too many of those. But anything that's an actual romantic comedy, I'm definitely watching it. And there's not many. It's one or two a year. Yeah.
That was a hypothesis. I'm curious if it resonates with your experience, or if that's not quite right. That they've become more sort of self-aware, winky, in the
absolutely.
last 20
years. I mean, I think quite generally across the board, it's this current generation is irony pilled big time. And the kind of sincerity that we find in Twilight is just it feels embarrassing in a certain way, because the sort of generation that was crying at Titanic and then screaming at Twilight, and there's just I think that there's a sense of ironic detachment that is that'll come and go. It's not permanent, but right now that's where we're at. That sincerity is out of vogue, I think.
Even for teenagers, though, because I feel like I was probably painfully sincere as a teenager.
Well, but you were in the generation that was screaming at Titanic. So
I mean, I don't have my finger on the pulse of the TikTok generation by any means.
Yeah, no, I don't know either. And I haven't watched
like just judging by the movies, that we're seeing.
And I suppose the TV shows too, right? That's the other thing. And I just stopped watching TV, so I don't really know. But my sense is that, I mean, my guess is like things like Emily in Paris and whatever, that there's this more self-aware.
I don't know. So like teenage girls are just like not writing Fiona Apple lyrics in their journal every night. I don't even understand that.
What about that movie Letters to Juliet? I remember the trailer for that seeming very sincere.
Yeah, Euphoria is pretty sincere.
Is it? Okay.
You know, I mean, I wouldn't say we wouldn't want to be, you know, these generalizations are all going to have lots of exceptions. But I do think that, like, regarding Twilight in particular, I mean, I think that you're right in a sense that, like, I think that it's the combination of the fact that it does take itself seriously and that people do take it seriously and that the audience of the movie is invested in the romantic storyline, but also that the movie is so weird and shaggy and, you know, uneven in these other ways. So it's like the idea is that, like, how can a movie that has the vampire baseball scene ask us to take seriously this romance?
I mean, the other, yeah, exactly. And I mean, the other thing is that the abstinence thing. I mean, and because I think that's the other part of it that I think people react very negatively to, especially people who fancy themselves, you know, educated, largely liberal, you know,
abstinence and pro-life.
Yeah, well, yes. So we can talk about the pro-life thing later, but the abstinence thing is a big part of T1. You know, you know, there's even a scene where they're making out on the bed, and he has to like recoil because he's like, I have to, otherwise I'll lose control.
Stop it.
I'm sorry.
You're stronger than I thought.
Yeah, I wish I could say the same.
And like equating sex with violent death, it's going to provide a certain person with a kind of rationalization for why this movie sucks, right? I mean, it's right there, ready to hand.
I would say beyond that, I mean, I think it's why people are going into the movie with already deciding that it sucks.
Yeah.
Stephanie Meyer is a Mormon, right? And she wrote the Twilight books. And I don't need to tell you this. Right now, we're in a crisis of tribalism, right? As a nation, as a world. And like, there's this sense that, like, if you're on the other team, you're my opponent, you're my enemy, right? And so whenever there's, and you know, this is something that this is a case that I try to make quite broadly, that like, it's a big problem, I think, that whenever there's an artwork that has some kind of conservative provenance, that the person is in any way has conservative credentials, that, you know, this person's a libertarian or a Mormon or anything like that, that we like line ourselves up against it as though it's our enemy in advance, right? And read into it all our worst, all the worst things we think about the category of people. We read it into the work, right? So like Stephanie Meyer is a Mormon, and her Mormonism shows up in the books and the films. But the question we should be asking is in what way, right? And like, what is ultimately overall the film's attitudes towards these questions? And like, I think just on the face of it, right? If you just look at the reception of Twilight and the way that Twilight fans engage with Twilight, it is overflowing with sexual energy, right? If there's anything at all that's true about Twilight fandom, it is that it is horny.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
And let's be clear that Twilight has an enormous gay male fandom, right? And that you'll find articles like queering Twilight and the gay male gaze. Like, this is a big thing, right? And so I think just as a starting point, prima facie, when you have a movie where the most salient fact about it is that all the people that like it are so horny about it, like, I would not think that our biggest concern ought to be that it's pro-abstinence. So, because the thing is that Stephanie Meyer is a Mormon, but like the film is concerned with certain aspects of Mormon experience. What it's like to get married when you're super young, right? What it's like to have sex for the first time when you're already married. What it's like to have a child when you're quite young. What other people's attitudes towards you are in those circumstances, right? Yep. It's like, oh, like, I mean, she's like, everyone's going to think that it's because I was pregnant. And that's what they do think, right? Everyone does. In the diegetic world of the movie, it's seen as weird they're getting married so young, right? And in the world of the movie, we got to ask ourselves, does the movie adopt some preachy stance about abstinence? And the answer is absolutely not. Once they have sex for the first time, Edward discovers that she's now would be willing to stay human because the sex felt so good. He was like, oh, I would have done this immediately, right? If I knew that. And moreover, regarding the like pro-life thing, I mean, we'll come back to this, but like there is no pro-life character in the movie. Everyone wants her to have an abortion, and her own argument to not have an abortion is not a pro-life generalized argument, right? It's having to do with the specifics of the fact that it's Edward's child and she loves him, right? And so I take it that people read all this crap into the movie that's just not there, right? Like the movie is about the experiences of a woman that reflects in certain ways Mayer's experiences as a Mormon, but it's not proselytizing. It's not demonizing, right? If anything, it's sexualizing. It's showing us how hot it is to be a Mormon, right? It's showing us right?
How much sexual tension can you get by prolonging that first sexual contact, right? And really, drawing it out for 4 movies, like it's getting pretty tense there.
And then when they finally have sex, what happens? It's very gentle. We see it very gentle, and then we cut, and then in the morning, the hotel room is wrecked.
It's destroyed.
Bruises all over her, right? And so there's some implication that this is like an outrageously kinky spectacle, right? Because they've destroyed the hotel room. Like, how did they do that? Right?
Yeah, she has bruises on her body.
All over her body, right? And so it's like, how did all this happen? It's left totally to our imagination, which I think makes it even kinkier. Right, that it doesn't, that it's left for us to fill in the blanks, right? And so, but this is the idea that in the film, it's not like, oh, sex is bad, like, you know, it's dirty. It's rather like by waiting for sex, she has this absolutely extraordinary sexual experience, which again, I don't have a problem with that. You know, I'm no Mormon, but it's like for me to start moral hand wringing about that and to start like, oh, you know, to me is just bad faith.
Yeah, that just on that, I feel like just as the sexual tension developed over the first 4 movies, as I find deeply uncomfortable, just how much tension there is there. When they finally have sex and you see the bed's broken and it's so intense that she's got bruises and she's like, it was amazing. And Edward's like, I can't do this to you because, you know, it's like, it's too intense or whatever. I'm uncomfortable. I'm sitting there like, holy shit, this is like as uncomfortable as like, I don't know, watching a movie where 2 people do simulate sex and you're just like, whoa, this is real uncomfortable. Like maybe you're sitting there watching with your parents or something, but I'm sitting here watching this by my, you know, with you in the room and I'm just like, holy crap, this is uncomfortable. I couldn't imagine being a 13-year-old girl going to see this movie Breaking Dawn. We're talking about Breaking Dawn Part 1 here. We're talking about, and you're in the theater with your parents and that's happening. My fucking mind would be, I would have to leave, I think.
Yeah, and here's the mind-blowing fact. So guess which movies Stephanie Meyer herself produced? Breaking Dawn 1, Breaking Dawn 2. Wow. She did not produce the other ones, right? So you'll notice those 2 movies. So Breaking Dawn 1 got an R. They had to cut it to so Stephanie Meyer as a Mormon does not watch R-rated movies, but the one that she produced got an R, and they had to cut it, right? So again, it shows you like this woman has a kinky imagination. Yeah. Like it's not, and like under her creative control, the movies got kinkier and more sexual, not less, right? And it's just the problem is the mere fact that it's within a Mormon framework leaves people to see it as conservative when it's not. And like I would also highlight the fact that like sexual fantasies can be regressive. Like that's, I mean, I would invite the audience, I would invite them everyone to consider their own sexual fantasies for traces of regression. And I'm sure that you will find them, right? Yeah. So like the idea that the movie appeals to the audience. It's not like trying to proselytize the audience to become Mormons or sexual conservatives, but it's rather that to the extent that our fantasies are regressive already, it grips us.
That's interesting. I'll just play devil's advocate slightly because Edward is also written as a somewhat regressive patriarchal male figure, right? Mm-hmm. Because he's this sort of overprotective, but he's also got this kind of like paternalistic side where he makes these choices for her. He's like, I will decide like when you become a vampire, and I will decide. I'll be the one who protects you, and I'll be the one who, I can restrain myself, so you don't have to or whatever. Like I'm doing this like for your sake. It's always like for her sake. And there is an element of that is, I think, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with, but of course, he's from 100 years ago. So, like, in a way, it's a realistic depiction of a guy who's, he calls himself old school, right? And yeah, I mean, a guy who was born in 1900 would be old school, right? He would have these older values that, like, he truly believes in. It's clear, I don't know, maybe it's not clear, but he seems to not have had any relationships since 1900 or whatever when he was turned. So I can forgive the movie in that regard because I just think, well, it's part of his character. Like,
and I don't think it's overly romanticized. Parts of it are, but not. But I think the character of Bella actually does they do a pretty good job sort of threading that needle where, she's definitely attracted to some of his more conservative, old-timey aspects, but she pushes back on him a good amount. I mean, she says things to me like, you have to trust me, or like, you can't make these choices for me. It's not your decision to make, it's mine.
Yeah, that's right.
And she says that quite a lot to Jacob too, because Jacob is also trying to do this on her behalf. I do wonder, I mean, in 2008, and if you're a teenage girl watching these movies, are you thinking like, these guys suck a couple of times a movie or not? Because I was, but I don't know how that was received at the time.
Because that's the other thing, is the Jacob thing in 3, where Jacob is, he's so overly aggressive in his pursuit of Bella that, there is this thing where I recoil a little bit because it's like, you worry that, is this portrayed as like, this is what a guy should do, or is this portrayed as like, no, this guy's actually like not good and she should be rejecting him. Now, I think it walks that line because she punches him in the face,
but then she, she's, as you said, magnanimous. Like she like sees his good and like, lets him kind of.
He is cowed
and with his tail between
him.
his legs, his wolf tail between his legs.
Yeah. But what do you think, Matt?
Yeah. So, so I would make the case. I would predict that somebody who's just starting to get into these movies is not going to have an easy time with the third one. The third one is the hardest one to like. I think. And it's exactly because almost the entire movie is these two male characters like embodying these sort of awful male tendencies, right? And like fighting over Bella in a way that in both cases is regressive in different ways, right? But here's my case that I would make for it. So first of all, we remember that it's supposed to be Wuthering Heights and that Jacob is freaking Heathcliff.
Yeah, right? that makes a lot of sense.
That actually starts to, right, there's this aspect that I do think that the movie is very critical, that the movies are very critical of both characters. And that like Edward both is directly called out for it, but also that we like see the consequences, right, of his actions. And that, like Laura said, Bella is constantly reminding him of her own agency, right? And like when pressed about this, Stephanie Meyer's case was that she's like, I see it as feminist because that Bella is always the one who ends up choosing. So even though the men try to like impose their wills on her, she actually always ends up being the one who makes the choice. Now, regarding the third one, though, like what I find really interesting about it is the careful attention that it pays to these like really awful twists and turns that these high school relationships can take, right? So it's like when you think back to what your love life was like at that age, like 16, 17 years old, right? And like the way that like people behave when they don't get what they want, when things don't go the way they want, because they're not adults yet. Like I'm certain when I look back at like the way I acted, if I got rejected or something when I was 16, I don't feel proud of that, right? Sure. In retrospect, like just pure honesty here. Whatever high school classmates are listening to this, sorry.
The apology is now being issued.
No, right? I mean, I don't like, but the point is that we don't take rejection well. We don't take these things well. We don't, and that what the movie portrays is in a way like a very real situation where Bella like gets close to one guy, but she has a loyalty to another one, and they're both shitty, and they're both trying to tell her what to do, and nobody's cares what she wants, and that is, I think, like a very real experience. And I really appreciate the kind of loving attention that the movie gives to this kind of love triangle that is so messy and so reflective of the kind of immaturity of typical relationship at that age.
Totally.
Yeah, I think that's
and
right.
It ends up in such a beautiful place.
I
maybe some people laugh at the part where Jacob imprints on Renesmee, but I was just like giddy with delight at the idea that this is
that's the Midsummer Night's Dream part, right? So that's the idea. And so right, and so Jake and I. It's sort of the implication is supposed to be that when Renesmee comes of age, she will be romantically with Jacob. And there's something deeply creepy about that in the movie, right? Like it's like, ooh, wait, she's a baby, but eventually, but but like that's supposed to be the Midsummer Night Dream aspect. Is like the lover switching and like the magic. So the imprinting is supposed to be like the magic, right? And the idea is supposed to be that like that we get like a rondo where like we're switching lovers, where it's like instead of Bella and Jacob, it's Jacob and Renesmee, and that was the sort of magic. That was the point the whole time, and the magic was working through the story from the beginning.
I see. Right. The line where he says, this is what it was all for. Oh, interesting. I was just loving the idea of like a sitcom spinoff where he's Uncle Joey and he like lives in the Cullen house in the basement as like the one werewolf in a house full of vampires. I was just like, hell yeah. Like that's how this love triangle resolves, is that he's just like the caretaker for their child and he's like really happy about it. And he's like wearing an apron. My God.
He still is kind of Uncle Joey because he's going to be her brother-in-law now. Or no, he's going to be her. Wait, what would it be? He would be her son-in-law. Oh,
son-in-law.
Yeah, son-in-law.
Yeah.
Amazing. I didn't think that was where that was going to go, and I could not be happier about it. What a sweet series.
I mean, I do like that they do resolve it, and it's resolved as they become this giant, strange, unusual family, much like the Cullens, who are this kind of giant, strange, unusual family from the beginning, right? They're adopted kids, but they're with each other, and they comment on that where they're like, "Isn't that weird?" But they're adopted, but they also live together. There's something weird about it. But it's also, it's like love takes many forms.
Sure. I don't know if this is going to be really off topic. So Matt, you should go first and then I'll ask my silly question.
Okay.
Oh, well, I was going to say I think mine is more off topic. So.
Just go. It's fine.
Okay, I was going to wonder,
damn.
just real quick, I was thinking about, is it the third film also that has all the Jasper backstory?
Ooh, I think so.
Yeah, it is the third one because he's training them to fight the newborn army.
The newborns. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. So he's like,
You love the third one. Laura's sitting here like, I was like, the third one is clearly the worst one. And Laura's like, well, that's the Jasper backstory.
Right. No,
I'm just wondering.
Backstory. Yeah. And it also has the tent scene, which is like one of the greatest scenes in all of Twilight, which is like, I am hotter than you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a great line. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you could because I think Stephenie Meyer's kind of like, apparently she rewrote the first book from Edward Cullen's perspective. And I think she did like a gender swap one now where it's like Edward is like Edwina or something, and she did a gender swap version of Twilight, and I think she might have also did some stories about like what Renesmee's life is when she grows up. So she's kind of spinning this out. So I'm wondering like if you could have like a standalone movie about any of the characters, who would you want more info on?
Yes.
Like who would you want more Jasper backstory? Would you want to know about like what's up with Emmett? What's up with Emmett?
That is a great question. I mean, Emmett remains a mystery.
Like, if you tell me he's in the 1700s, like, absolutely not.
No,
not that guy.
Emmett was turned in 1990. He was turned in 2010, I think.
Yeah. Do you have anybody that you're just like
that I want to go long on?
Yeah.
I wrote this in my review of Breaking Down 1, which is basically I'm always interested in the Abomination Child. So I'm going all in on Renesmee. I want to know what Renesmee is doing with her like full knowledge and power and ability to fly and whatever else she's got. And she's 7 and she's fully grown. Is that what it's supposed to be? And like, I don't know. I want to know what's all up with that. Because she reminds me of Alia, my favorite character from Dune. So
yeah, and I would say like in Breaking Dawn 2, we get the like political dissident vampires that like Vladimir want to like have a revolution. Like I'm interested to follow their political extremism from here. Like where do they go to try to like foment political dissidence within the vampire community? That's what I want to see.
Okay, yeah, gosh, in that fifth movie there's so many different directions we could go, so many worlds we could explore.
I was going to say some stuff about the family thing if you want to talk about that more.
Yeah,
let's do it.
What's interesting to me about it is that, these characters, they don't have to live together as a family. They could just go live independently from each other.
Yep.
Right. And so, but like, what's interesting is that in choosing the family, they're not simply choosing like to just live as like a sort of pack or a group. They're also choosing to play certain roles just for eternity. Right. So it's like even though they're not related to each other as parent and child. Carlisle is the father, right? And there's a mother figure, and then there's the kid, the children. Even though the kids are all in sexual relationships with each other, they play the role of being permanently the kids in this family. And then Carlisle actually does function as a father figure to them in perpetuity. So this has been going on, and I find that super interesting because so like, I think about like so. I don't know if you know the movie Now Voyager, a classic melodrama with Betty Davis. In that movie, Betty Davis becomes like the wealthiest person, like the wealthiest woman in the world, wealthiest powerful woman in the world. And what she ends up doing with this is that she like basically actualizes this like imaginary family where she within this family, the characters call her by like a made up name. It's just complete pretend family. And there's the idea that this is sort of like a space for the exercise of agency. And just sort of getting to choose and manufacture the life and family you want and play the role that you want to play in that family. And so what's interesting to me in Twilight is this idea of like, not just that we choose to associate ourselves with other people and thereby make a family, but that we choose to adopt a certain role. And the idea that like, that can come apart from stuff like, so it's like we adopt the role of a son in part in a way that corresponds with like certain events in life. Like we grow up and we leave, but like you can just sort of adopt that role by choice later in life. Like I can right now adopt like a surrogate father figure and like, you know, and the way that the movie presents that is something admirable in a way like that, like these people live like this in this family is something that we admire about.
My sense of that is that Carlisle is the one with the most self-control, right? He's like the person who has like the clearest moral outlook, right? He has like a position and he's sort of the guru leader of the crew and he teaches them how to have self-control. He occupies that role as like a mentor and they then are occupying the role of as children of like followers of as like adherents of him. So it's almost like they're bonded in that family unit, partly because of this, that they have stuff to learn from him. And I think also maybe partly because we know there are all these other vampire packs out there because they're vegetarians, they're kind of on their own in a way. I mean, that's another question I actually had for the movie was there's absolutely no reason they need to be in fucking high school. Like right. You might think like that's like I would not choose that. If I was like, do I have to I could live my life in perpetuity. What would I do? Not fucking go to high school. Why would I do that? If we learn the same shit over and over again?
Yeah, he can recite all of Romeo and Juliet by heart.
I would not. That was like the last thing I would choose.
Yeah.
But maybe it is because they've chosen to play these roles as children that they...
I think the point is that they have to go to high school in order to stay still in one place. So they could keep moving. They could have be like nomads. But the idea is that like in order to stay put, it's like they're going to have to go to high school or else Child Protective Services is going to get called. So I take it that the reason that they agree to do this is like a cost they have to pay for the stability of living in this family and being able to stay in one place and establish a kind of normalcy.
I see.
Which, of course, Edward wants to do because it makes him feel more human.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I mean, but I guess the reason it doesn't work for me that much maybe it's better in the books, but in the movie, they don't look like high school students. They look like, they look like fucking 20-year-olds. So like, I'm like, you could just work at a bar. Like nobody's going to worry about that.
Right.
But if they look like they're 12 or something, then
I
could. But actually 16. Yeah, would be believable.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I know. I was like, so when he's like, if we matriculate, the youngest we can, the younger we start, the longer we can stay there. And I'm like, they're putting these kids in as freshmen because that's crazy.
Yeah, like Emmett is wider than he is tall. He's a built dude.
I want an Emmett spinoff. But yeah, one of the funny things about it is that like if you get turned at 17, like you're 17 and you're also 100 and whatever, and I think like that's sort of the weird thing about Edward too, is that he's like has the old timey principles of somebody who's 150 and the raging hormones of a 17-year-old. And like, they still kind of get themselves in situations in which they need daddy. Like they go to their honeymoon and she's pregnant and he's like, what? And he calls his dad. He's like, can that even happen? Like this guy's 150, but he's like, holy shit. Yeah, I just got a girl pregnant. I got to call my dad.
He's been alive long enough that he could be a doctor too. Like there's nothing holding him back from gaining a medical degree. But he's just chosen to be like, nah, my dad's got that covered. I'm going to do my thing.
I'm going to go read Romeo and Juliet for the 800th time.
So Matt, you in the book said your favorite is Breaking Dawn Part 1. So tell us a bit about why you love Breaking Dawn Part 1.
So Breaking Dawn Part 1, which is the first film that was produced by Stephanie Meyer. And my hypothesis is that like there's a sense in which the studio control exerted over the first three made them more conform to convention than they might have, right? And that like the Stephanie Meyer produced ones are the most unconventional. And indeed, they feel strangely adult to me. Like when you're watching them in a row, all of a sudden the last two feel much more adult. And I do think that Stephanie Meyer acting as producer for those probably something to do with that. And the fact that they more fully reflect her own vision. And so the fourth one, first of all, the way the movie is structured is super weird. And I think it's extremely interesting. And I'm more interested in it every time I watch it. So we start with a wedding. And like, side note, Bella, so even though the wedding is this like romantic, perfect, beautiful thing, like my wife, Angela, when we watch it, she's like, I just love the wedding so much. She just like, just totally buys into the romance of it. But what's interesting is that Bella is constantly disowning this in the movie. She's constantly, I don't care about this. Do you really? And it's Alice who's fussing over the wedding. But that lets the like edgy goth girl who likes Twilight identify with Bella, right?
Yeah. She's like, I'm gonna wear my sneakers.
I don't care about weddings. And yeah. Exactly. Right. But like, so, but the thing is that we really spend some time on this wedding. And I love that about the movie, right? That like, it's like The Godfather, where like you spend the first like third of the movie just having a wedding and just like meeting the guests and like having the speeches, right? So first of all, I love that. I love the fact that we just have this wedding, right? And then we go on a honeymoon. And like what happens on the honeymoon is that like it's initially framed as this just absolutely magical experience for Bella. And so at this up till this point in the movie, we're living in a fantasy. But things take an immediate turn the morning she wakes up. And the way I think of this is like, whenever we have something in life that's built up like this, whenever we have some huge event that we're looking forward to with just the weight of like it's the most important thing that could ever happen, there's an inevitable sense of disappointment that follows, I think, right? And so the movie really captures this, I think, in a way that is, I would say, brilliant even, that the way she wakes up from this, and Edward's, so she wakes up like, wasn't that amazing? And he wakes up, I hate myself, right? And he experiences the self-loathing we've talked about because, he's bruised her in various ways. And it reminds him of the fact that he's not human, that he's not able to have sex with her without, in some sense, hurting her. Yeah. And so he becomes extremely distant, right? And she gets upset. But what happens? We play out an entire imaginary fantasy of her honeymoon, right? We see like her dream honeymoon. We see them like playing board games on the beach and having cocktails and having sex. We see this whole thing. And then the movie takes it away, right? It was just a fantasy that she was having. Right. And I would add earlier, when she was having wedding jitters at the beginning of the movie, her wedding jitters are her having a daydream about standing on the corpses of everyone she knows. Yeah. By the way, throw in that detail. So like she wakes up from this and she has this sort of fantasy. And what we're left to see is the juxtaposition of her fantasy of her honeymoon and her actual honeymoon. And her actual honeymoon is that she like fights with Edward, like eventually convinces him to have sex with her again, realizes all of a sudden that she's pregnant already. And that not only that the pregnancy is advancing in a way that should be impossible. So what ends up happening is we have like a horror finale. And what I think, I'm a horror fan, a big horror fan. And I actually think that like the movie is immensely successful as horror in the sense that like we move so smoothly from this perfect honeymoon, reckoning with disappointment, to like the disappointment becomes more and more intense, to the point where by the end of the movie, it's absolutely harrowing, right? Like, and we get this incredible image that you'll remember of Bella with like where Edward has given her a cesarean section. So what's happened is the vampire fetus has started developing so rapidly that she's dying. So she has to like drink blood in order to feed the fetus. So she starts to like recover her strength. Everyone's trying to convince her to have an abortion. She refuses to do it. And then she has she goes into labor prematurely. And Edward has to give her a cesarean section with his fangs, right? And when that's presented in the movie, there's like a crunch, right? It's presented in a way that is, I find, I'm a 40-year-old man, and it scares me, right? So I'm trying to imagine as like a 14-year-old girl who's at the theater, right? I'm trying to imagine this experience. I'm 14 years old. I love Twilight. I'm so bowled over by the romance of this wedding. Now I'm disappointed, and all of a sudden I'm horrified, right? And I think that the way that this movie builds intensity, and we end up with this image of Kristen Stewart with her stomach having been cut open, right, bloody, like a crucifix splayed out, right? And like it's just it's the most memorable image in the entire series, I think, right? Is the image of Bella after she's given birth.
That overhead shot that you're talking about, also they CGI or whatever, they did something so that she's like a skeleton.
Yeah.
She's a skeleton. I mean, they've been doing this with makeup and whatever to make her gaunt, but then you see the legs and her legs are just like
little
bones,
sticks.
you know? Like it's actually, that might be the shot that's the most terrifying for me. Is just like seeing how thin she is. Just because it just conjures to mind all the images of starving people that we see, like in the Holocaust and so on. So it's horrible, but
it really is terrifying, right? And then of course Edward desperately tries to so we get it's like Pulp Fiction. Right, where he shoots her and he gets her in the chest with a syringe of his venom, and it's very much reminiscent of the scene in Pulp Fiction, right?
Yep.
But instead of her gasping, waking up immediately, it's prolonged, and we get like a whole nother section of the movie, and then at the end she gasps, and we get this sort of Uma Thurman Pulp Fiction waking up moment, right? But in between, we get these really weird images of the vampire virus or whatever spreading through her body and turning her to vampire. I mean, you could screenshot those and you could post those and not tell someone what the movie is, and they'd be like, what is this experimental film that you're sharing these images from, right? Like those images are wild, right? Of like the inside of the body as like the vampirism takes her over, right? And so we get the sound design of her screaming internally with the pain of this. Well, she looks dead from the outside, right? And that stuff is the way that those scenes are edited, where it's almost like a Tony Scott thing where the image starts shaking and it's like, right. And so I think part of the reason that Breaking Dawn Part 1 has so much impact, and part of the reason is that it's like the first three movies, the menace is this not that interesting redhead vampire, right? It's Victoria. She's it's really not the most exciting menace at all. And the movies are more interesting because of the main characters, not because of the conflict. But now all of a sudden we get this absolutely harrowing horror movie that you're really not expecting if you're watching these in order. And instead of being this sort of mundane, this vampire wants to kill her, it becomes pregnancy and the risk of death during childbirth becomes the conflict. And it's horrifying in a way that I think we're not prepared for, and which makes it even more horrifying.
Yeah, that is totally right. I mean, what did you, as a woman who's given birth?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a new idea that pregnancy and birth is completely horrifying. There are lots of great movies that do this, but the scene where they give her a styrofoam cup full of blood and she drinks it and she's like, it's good. I was, that there.
It's thick.
One of the earliest.
You watch her suck it up. It's thick,
yeah. And Jacob's I'm gonna be sick. But the thing is one of the early moments where pregnancy hits you is when you start having morning sickness, and that's before you're showing, it's early days, but all of a sudden your body's ugh. I do not like that, or something a food you loved. I couldn't brush my teeth without wanting to vomit for 4 months. I tried cinnamon toothpaste. Toothpaste was disgusting.
I remember
to me.
that you were buying
so
new
weird.
toothpaste every
I was
week.
constantly buying new. I was maybe if it's this flavor. It was just gross, and it's just you have this moment where you're oh, what the fuck? This thing is the size of a seed, and it has completely taken me over. My body is not my own. My previous tastes are different, and that's insane and so powerful and scary.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to this, I mean, from the outside, the other part that was really scary was leading up to childbirth, because the whole time you're okay, I'm about to do this thing, which is. It's a prolonged process that takes 24 to 48 hours of just pain. And you're wondering, I don't think I could do this. Can I do this? I don't know. But but you're also I don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
It's
too late.
Yeah. It's just it's something's about to happen and it's going to suck, but I can't do anything about it.
Right.
Yeah. So I really related. Especially with that cup of blood. I was just I know what that feels weirdly.
There are not a lot of good horror movies that are made for younger audiences, right? Most of the horror movies that are made for younger audiences, they are derivative and they pander and they're not that scary, and they're and I honestly would say if you were to ask me what is the best young adult horror movie in recent memory, I might say Breaking Dawn Part 1, frankly, because I think it's really rare that you get a horror movie that it's creative, it's unconventional, it's genuinely scary. There are some extremely memorable images that still stick in my head right now. And I think you can say all that things. You have a special movie, but the fact that a lot of people couldn't see that because there's this full weight of cultural disdain for Twilight behind them as they walk into the theater, right? They're not walking in like open to the possibility this is going to be a rock and horror movie.
Yeah.
They're walking in ready to hate another Twilight movie or whatever.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Or they didn't even get to it because
they didn't get to it. They had to watch it because they're a critic and it's work or whatever, or they're watching them all because they feel like they need to know what's going on and they never had a chance to, something like that, And I think like it's really easy to ruin a horror movie for yourself. It's super easy, right? Like if you like watch it with the lights on, if you watch it during the daytime, if you don't have the volume up loud enough, if you pause it at the wrong times, you can absolutely ruin a horror movie for yourself really easily, right? It's like you can't blame a horror movie for not scaring you if you didn't watch it right.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it is a really harrowing ending, and then it leads into what I think is actually kind of a really, I don't know, I kind of really enjoy the first part of Breaking Dawn Part 2, where all of a sudden we see Bella as a vampire for the first time. It's the thing she's always wanted. I mean, I guess it was in Breaking Dawn Part 1 where Jacob is kind of now part of the family, but he really does once the imprinting happens, and now in 2 you're really seeing like the unification of this family in a way that there was, that's the resolution of a tension that's been ongoing in the films from the first one. And I think there's something very satisfying about that. Finally, after 4 films, get a kind of resolution to the central tension of the film.
So Part 2, I agree. Part 2, I love as well. And I think it also is a much more sort of formally unconventional movie, the way it's structured, just like Breaking Dawn Part 1 is. So first, I agree with you. The opening is amazing. It's like the effects of Bella's super perception are extremely fun. I think, right? Like when she starts seeing fast and zooming in. I think that's actually really well done. But it's played for slapstick, right? And it's genuinely funny slapstick, where it's like she's too strong and she taps somebody and they go flying, right? And she doesn't know her own strength. And then we she doesn't know, of course, that Jacob is imprinted on Renesmee. Right.
Yes.
So we meet Renesmee. So first of all, the choice to have a CGI baby is a mind-boggling and bizarre and really fun choice, I think, with these giant CGI eyes. Right? So we meet this CGI baby, and we get the by far the funniest line in all of Twilight, which is, so her name is Renesmee, but Jacob's like,
because it was her. From the beginning, it was Nessie who wanted me there.
Nessie? You nicknamed my daughter after the Loch Ness Monster?
and the thing is that because Jacob is imprinted, he can't turn this off. He can't okay, you're right. He's like, actually, give her to me though, right? And so Bella's like, I've met my daughter once, and you think you have some weird wolfy claim over her, right? I find that whole stuff extremely funny.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that this is intentionally funny. I think this is all like a big slapstick, comedic portion of the movie. But then what ends up happening, right? And so it becomes like a hangout movie. And, this is something that I really am interested in quite generally. There's like a sort of expectation in, Hollywood filmmaking that everything that happens in the movie seems to somehow move things forward, right? And there's like a whole genre category of movies that operate in exactly the opposite way, the hangout movie, where what we're mostly focused on is just people hanging out, doing whatever, like just talking. So Quentin Tarantino is probably like the contemporary king of the hangout movie, Death Proof. And Death Proof is, I think, the greatest modern hangout movie. But Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, also a hangout movie. Licorice Pizza is a hangout movie. So I think like Breaking Dawn Part 2 is just a total hangout movie, right? Like the
mentioned in the same breath as Paul Thomas Anderson and Quentin Tarantino. I love it.
Yeah. Right. No, I mean, I think that like most of the movie, what we're doing, it's kind of like, it starts out like a Seven Samurai kind of thing, where we're like rounding up various badasses from all over, right? But then like so much of the movie is like this just waiting for the conflict to happen, just waiting. And we just see like this motley crew of these. It's like Rami Malek is like a vampire sorcerer who has like the powers of the Avatar, right? And like we meet all these like oddball vampire characters, and they're just like hanging out at the house. Like they do stuff like have arm wrestling matches.
Yeah,
right?
It's so fun.
And so I mean, I think that's really fun. Like I really love a movie that has the courage to just not have anything happen. Just like we're just a bunch of characters that are really interesting interacting with each other. And then ultimately nothing does end up happening. Right?
Yeah, I was going to say.
We get this giant showdown, right? We get this giant showdown. And so the Volturi, and they come with like all these vampires from Italy. And like there's this giant showdown on this like frozen lake or whatever with
soundstage,
this open prairie or whatever it is, with this motley group that we've rounded up throughout the whole movie. And what ends up happening is, right, we have this standoff, and we get this incredible action set piece, but it's a vision that Alice is giving Aro, the leader of the Volturi, right? It's just a vision, and so that vision ends up diffusing the conflict, and nothing ends up happening in the movie. So first of all, I would just, as like an overarching statement, I love movies where nothing happens, right? and this is one of them. But also that like I do. So I think that through that middle section, we get a lot of cool stuff, just a lot of cool like grace notes and fun moments. But then that final scene, so that's supposed to be the trial for Merchant of Venice. So Caius, the character Caius, who is the guy that kind of looks like Legolas, the vampire, the Volturi with the parted hair, the blonde hair in the middle. So Caius is supposed to be Shylock, right? So he's the one who, so in Merchant of Venice, what happens is Shylock has elicited a promise that if this other character doesn't pay his debts, then he'll have to literally cut out a pound. Antonio will cut out a pound of flesh because he didn't pay his debt, and that will kill him, of course, right? So at the trial, Shylock is pushing for him to have to do this. And even once it becomes clear how destructive this is, and so that's like Caius in the movie. Like Caius is pushing for like, let's have this massacre. And then Alice is Portia. So Portia in Merchant of Venice is like the daughter character, I think. Forget daughter or no, it's the wife of the friend, right? So, but the point is that she disguises herself as a man and acts as a lawyer in the trial. So that is Alice in Breaking Dawn 2, is the lawyer who defeats Shylock with Aro as the judge, right? So first of all, let me just comment that like this like incredibly wonky scene. It's amazing to me that it is a Shakespeare adaptation, right? And in a way that is not, it is quite subtle, and that like would not be at all obvious. Like it takes like, you have to like do some research to understand how this is supposed to work, right? But also like that. So what happens is Alice shows Aro what will happen if they fight. And it's like a freaking bloodbath, right? And so there was this like clickbait article going around, I remember maybe a year ago. And the clickbait article was, the finale of Breaking Dawn Part 2 is better than anything in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? And this was presented as just like clickbait, like where people would share this in order to get people angry. But the fact is that it's just so obviously true, right? Like we've reached a point where like this sort of obviously true thing counts as trolling. That's that piece where it's partly because the movie's diegetic universe is like no one's getting, it's like so friendly and nice. And then all of a sudden, like almost every character dies, right? In this sort of imaginary version of this, and dies in ways that are quite gruesome and unsentimental. Like it's like right away, Carlisle's head gets ripped off, like immediately. And like as the viewer, you don't yet know, like you're thinking this can't be real, like right? You're thinking that, but you don't know that. Like the movie doesn't tell you that. So it's sort of like the experience of watching like Avengers: Infinity War, where like you see Black Panther die or whatever, and you think like, oh, they're going to take that back, but you don't exactly know how. Somehow, right? But like the fact remains that this set piece is just extraordinary, right? Where it's like a chasm opens up, and it's like the most imaginative and wild, one of the most imaginative and wild action set pieces in recent memory, I think. And we get this resolution, which gives Michael Sheen a lot of opportunities for amazing acting. Like when Michael Sheen does that high-pitched chortle.
Young Bella, immortality becomes you. I hear a strange heart.
So that's my case for Breaking Dawn Part 2. That first of all, it's the construction of it is super weird in a way that I find interesting, but also that each of the parts I think is extremely well done in its own way. And I think that both of those last two so my overall view of Twilight is that the first three are like a cycle that is kind of good, bad, and also genuinely good in some ways, but like has a lot of good, bad appeal. And then like Breaking Dawn Part 1 and 2 is this kind of like out there masterpiece, right? Like, yeah,
that is amazing. I will just add on to the Marvel Cinematic Universe comparison. Yeah, I just on your point about the fake out. I mean, when those characters start dying, first of all, I was not prepared that it was a fake out, and I had no reason to think it was a fake out. Whereas in the Marvel universe, when something like that happens, you know it's a fake out because you know Black Panther 2, Black Panther 3, whatever is all coming.
Yeah, we know too much about the production cycle.
It's already been greenlit. Like, you know that these things are going to happen.
But you're like, this is the last Twilight movie. Like, maybe.
That's exactly it. I was sitting here thinking, yeah, this is it. There are no more of these. Like, this is the end of the story. Maybe his arc is that he has to sacrifice himself for Bella's child and all that. And like, that actually makes sense. And so when I'm sitting here watching these characters die, I'm thinking there's stakes to this universe. And then if
it's even better.
Yeah, which is better. And then I think when the fake out is I think also earned and it's fine. Like, I'm fine with happy endings too, but it's earned because you know that Alice has this ability. It's not like a cheap fake out because they've already given you all the seeds. So I think I agree with that's all there. I do think though that the central conflict of all of these movies, but in Breaking Dawn Part 2 is quite silly. I mean, the central conflict being that they have a child who's not an immortal demon child, and the Voltari think she is an immortal demon child, and they have to convince the Voltari that she's not. But I was thinking, the evidence is pretty clear. She's aging, and and like, I don't know. They can convince these other people very quickly. So how hard would it be to convince the Voltari? Like, I was sitting here thinking, like, this isn't much of a conflict. I forgive the movie for that. I don't really care.
Well, I mean, they give more than that, right? The idea is that like they kind of know that the Voltari don't
They're
really
trigger happy.
No, but that they want a couple of the Cullens for themselves. And so they're trying to kill the coven.
I see.
And so it doesn't really matter if she's an immortal child.
They're worried it's a smokescreen.
It's a smokescreen, exactly. So they're gathering witnesses because the Voltari can't just outright murder them all if like a bunch of other people know that the premise is false.
I didn't even catch on that.
Totally. And there's this background. I mentioned earlier that we get these political dissident vampires in Breaking Dawn Part 2, right? And they reference that the Volturi are like absolutist rulers, right? So there's like a sense that within the vampire political world, the Volturi are tyrants in a way, right? And so there's a sense in which the Cullens are like political dissidents to the extent that they don't live in the way they're very much on the outer edge of what's allowed in the vampire community, right? And so like there's a sense in which this is a pretext for the Volturi to bring them under their control, right? And so and the point is that's why that so many of the Volturi want to press the conflict even when it becomes clear that there's no law has been broken, because they start to make up reasons. They're like, oh, but they associate with werewolves, right? So it's really a pretext because the Cullens are political dissidents.
Yeah, okay.
And they want Alice's gifts for themselves,
right,
too.
They
know that Alice will never live.
Gifts, they want Bella's gifts.
Right. They know they're never going to separate from the Cullen coven unless they murder all the other ones.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so basically it makes so much sense, Justin.
I got it. I figure I'm on board. All right. Well, now that we've gone through that entire series, I want to know your rankings. Now, I have a feeling your rankings, Matt, but I want to start with you so to keep the audience in suspense about our rankings. So give us your 1 through 5 rankings of the Twilight movies.
I actually have trouble with this because I really like all of them in their own little way.
Yeah.
But like I would say Breaking Dawn Part 2 is the best one. And Breaking Dawn Part 1 is not far behind. And then among the remaining 3, I really go back and forth. I think that that Twilight, I would probably go original and then Breaking Dawn and then Eclipse, but in a way that's painful for me because I don't like to say that Eclipse is last. Like there's a way Eclipse is like by far the most unpleasant to watch. But I kind of admire that about it because it's unpleasant because it's so immersed in these like shitty high school relationship dynamics. And I think it's so vivid about that it has a lot of merit, but that it's like kind of a slog compared to the others. So I would go 4, 5, 1, 2, 3.
Got it. Yeah, got it. All right, Laura, you're up.
Oh God. Okay. It is hard. It's hard to do. Okay. 4 is definitely tops for me. I have a thing about first movies, I guess. So I think it's like 4, 1, 5, 3, 2.
Two's your last.
Yeah. It's too much Jacob.
Yeah. Because there's that stretch where Edward is gone.
He's gone. And it turns out like I'm all about the Bella and Edward stuff. And I'm not interested in Jacob at all. At all.
All right. So
sorry, unless he's Uncle Jacob and he's living in the basement.
No, you like when he becomes Uncle Jacob,
yes.
But when he's just the shirt is off and he's sort of hulking
fixing motorcycles. Yeah.
That's not for you.
No thanks.
My ranking is slightly different. So my ranking is 1, which I mean, now this could change because we've now seen 1 basically twice, and that
we're gonna have to watch it all 7 times, Matt.
We'll have to watch them all again. But 1, and then I do think 4. I really do think you've convinced me on 4. And then now I'm gonna say this is gonna sound pretty controversial, I think, but I think it's 2.
Okay.
But here's the reason. Now 2, when I first watched it, I was like, this is a big step down from 1. But then when we got to the end, I was really into it. I really like the ending of 2. So that's why it's 2. And then I go 5-3. But 2 and 5 are close to me. I don't know why I find them close. I mean, those are the 2 with the Volturi, but I like the Volturi more in 2 than in 5. And I love the other thing I like about 2, just as an aesthetic thing, is or just purely just viscerally, I love that scene when they're fighting in the Volturi's like chambers. When they do the kind of like speed ramping fight, I kind of think it looks really good. I really enjoy that speed ramp fight scene, and that's also the first time you see Dakota Fanning like use her like mind bullets, which I think is
the
great.
pain stuff. Yeah, I agree. They kind of get into a habit, I think, of having the big fight scenes later in the big field. I feel like there's several.
Yeah.
But the first movie has the mirrors the dance studio set
which
piece,
we didn't talk about.
And the second movie has a really great the Volturi is awesome.
The mirror scene set piece thing, I think is really cool. Like there's a moment when Bella's been bit on the arm and she's like convulsing, and in the background Edward is like beating up the bad guy. And then they're starting to like light a fire, and the camera does. Speaking of Tony Scott, actually, there's some Tony Scott flourish in that actually as well. With the sort of the camera's doing the shaky thing where it's like they're rack focusing, and it's getting like, you know, everything's like getting shimmery, and they're like superimposing different images on top of one another to like show you like Bella's sort of hallucinatory state of mind. And that is that interesting feeling, like, you know, when you've like hit your knee really hard or something, and like the wave of nausea like comes over you, and you're like, oh fuck, and like you just like can't focus on anything. It feels like that's kind of putting you in that headspace with Bella, like, and she's convulsing, the venom's taking over. I really dig that scene, actually. I think it's really cool.
It's also the first time you see the beheading thing. Which, because like Alice is trying to help, and then she gets like too like, you know, thirsty for the blood, for Bella's blood. She's like, Carlisle, like she's like, I can't do it. Yeah. And then she immediately just like swoops on to James and just tears his head off.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm just like, I'm sorry, what? Like, is that how you kill a vampire? They don't have stakes? Okay. Yeah. Because I don't know what the rules are first movie. I'm like, is there no garlic? Are there no stakes?
Well, they do explain them multiple times. They're like, remember I was making fun of this part where they're like,
I've had to fight her kind before, but not easy to kill.
But not impossible. We'll tear them apart and burn the pieces.
I don't relish the thought of killing another creature, even a sadistic one like James.
It's just funny that they're saying this to each other when they
several times.
Surely know how to kill a vampire.
Yeah. But I didn't know rip them apart meant like twisting their head off like a top of a bottle. I didn't like.
Yeah, you
I didn't know.
You do a little twist cap and then you burn them. And I also like when that part and I actually don't think he's a great villain, the guy who plays James or whatever, but I love the part when
guy?
Yeah, whatever. When he's filming her and he breaks her leg and it's like a crunch and it hits hard, and it's quite sadistic. And at that point I'm sitting here like, man, how are they going to get out of this? Like, it really does feel like there's a real tension there. Color grading aside, I'm all in on, and it's just so awkward. Everything about their interaction is so incredibly awkward and uncomfortable, and yet it's compelling. And I find it good, bad.
Awesome. Well, that warms my heart to hear.
Thank you so much, Matt, for first of all suggesting Twilight, because we would never have watched this. Well, I mean, we might have, but we would.
No, my reaction, as I think I told you before we started recording, was I was like, Justin, you signed us up for 5 movies for this podcast? Like, that's so much homework. Well, Matt, I don't want to do it.
Well, because when you suggested Twilight, you were like, you were giving us some movies, and I said, Twilight. I've never seen Twilight. Let's do that. And then you were like, you want to talk about just one, or do you want to do all of them? You might want to watch all of them. And I was like, well, we could do it. We got time. We'll watch all of them. And then when I told Laura, she was not happy with me.
But now I'm so happy with you, and so happy with you, Matt, because now I have Twilight in my life and I think about it all the time.
And we bought I think you commented on Letterboxd, so you got the discs, you got the 4K discs?
I got the 4K disc, and it looks so much better. It's yeah. Did you watch it on disc, or did you watch the?
We don't have the disc. We went ahead and just bought it on iTunes, but it's the 4K and it has the Atmos mix. Actually, the Atmos mix is good. It's a solid Atmos mix, and you see, the grain is all there. You see the film grain. I think it looks solid.
Yeah, the disc looks even better.
I'm sure.
Yeah, it looks very good. It looks very good on that. It's unfortunate the other ones are not on disc yet.
I see.
And a lot of those probably have, I don't know, but the first one I got the disc. It's like $12, or something like that. So it's not a big purchase.
Yeah.
But we watch it. We probably watch it. So my wife really loves Twilight. Like she I'm more into watching movies I haven't seen before, and she's more into rewatching.
Mm-hmm.
So she's constantly like, let's watch this. And I'm like, so we make deals essentially where, for a certain number of movies we haven't seen before, we can, rewatch some serials. And she's really, and the thing is that, like, I try to downplay how much I like Twilight, so she thinks she's winning a battle by getting us, oh, we'll watch all the Twilight. I'm like, oh, sure, I guess we can do that. When really I would have probably picked that.
The cat is out of the bag, Matt. You wrote a whole chapter on Twilight and your love of it.
I can no longer leverage her, get her to watch my Strohl movies by promising her I'll watch Twilight.
There you go.
Pull that trick, but she's really into it, and we definitely don't get through a whole year without watching all the Twilight movies ever.
That's awesome.
It's.
That may very well be a new tradition in the Koo household.
Mm-hmm.
So for the folks at home, the book is Why It's Okay to Love Bad Movies. It's by Matt Strohl. It's out by Routledge Press right now, and it is a great read. I highly recommend it. It's a breezy read, and the passion that Matt is talking about movies with us today is the passion that comes through in the book. And in fact, actually, there's a line Laura loves more than any other line. Do you want to say it out loud? Just to give you a flavor of there's humor, there's,
in reference to when somebody comes in, a troll comes in on your fan page and, says Charles Bronson isn't awesome. It's like pooping in the punch bowl.
This is not dusty, dry philosophy. This is conversational, enjoyable. Go check it out. I highly recommend it. Matt,
thank you for those kind words. Yeah.
Where can people find you if they want to see your takes on Twitter or Letterboxd or whatever?
Good question. My Twitter is Strohltopia, STROHL Topia. So it's strohltopia.com is my blog, and @Strohltopia is my Twitter. And then I'm on Letterboxd as Matt Strohl99, which is also linked from my Twitter.
There you go. Go check out Matt. Go follow him on social media. We are @CowsPod on Twitter. You can follow us on the web at cowspod.wordpress.com. And coming up next week, we're talking about Basic Instinct. So tune in for that in 2 weeks, and we'll see you then.
I was a quick, wet boy diving too deep for coins. All of your street wide on my plastic toys. Then when the cops closed the fair, I cut my long baby hair and stole me a dog-eared map. Called for you everywhere. Have I found